Hello, here I am back again with thoughts from the Vicarage. I'd already been thinking about how we could get to know our neighbour more, and I was drawn to a story about the Good Samaritan, and I think actually at this sad time when all the protests are going on in the United States, is probably a really good time, a parable, a really appropriate parable for this time. So I just want to read it to you, and so that we get the context. So it says, starting at verse 25, just then a religious scholar stood up with a question to test Jesus. Teacher, what do I need to do to get eternal life? He answered, what's written in God's law? How do you interpret it? He said, that you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbour as well as you do yourself. Good answer, said Jesus. Do it and you'll live. Looking for a loophole, he asked, and just how would you define neighbour? Jesus answered by telling a story. There was once a man travelling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on the way he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road, but when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite religious man showed up. He also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan travelling the road came upon him, and when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him on his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take good care of him. Take good care of him, and if it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back. What do you think? Which of the 3 became a neighbour to the man attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly, the religious scholar responded. Jesus said, Go and do the same. And the part of the text that I wanted to bring out was the bit about where he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all of your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. Do this and you will live. And then again, the religious scholar says, and who is my neighbour? And Jesus then tells that story. And then he says, and which of these do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell in the hands of robbers? And of course, the man says, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. And Jesus made it very clear in his commandment, love God and love your neighbours. And that's whoever we're involved in our lives, either in the street or at work. We still have to love them because Jesus does. So, what if we did what Jesus told us to do? Just get to know our neighbours. If we don't get to know our neighbours, how can we love them as we should? I don't find it very easy getting to know my neighbours, as I'm not very good at talking to new people I've never met before. And Kevin, on the other hand, is an absolute natural at it. He's the sort of guy that if you were sitting on the plane with a stranger in the middle, in between you, by the end of the flight, we'd be invited to his house and a meal as soon as we landed. In order to love our neighbour, we need to know our neighbour. And you can only do that by spending time with people around you and by looking for opportunities. The best way for me to get to know new people is to work with them or by doing something alongside them. And when I started the coffee shop in Cambridge, I had to serve people all day, and it was a way of getting to know them because they kept coming back for a chat. Or at work, when I worked for Simungos, you're just thrown all together, so you are forced to get to know each other. And it's an easier way of just beginning that conversation. On Sunday night, I was challenged by our Wild Goose Zoom meeting because Kevin mentioned about getting into our community and making a difference, getting to know our neighbours. And also he mentioned a book that I read about 10 years ago called The Art of Neighbouring by Jay Pathak. who came to speak at New Wine. It's a really easy book to read and challenges us about getting to know our neighbours, but in a very real way, sharing his experiences. So who are our neighbours? So they are the people who we see, they are the people who see us, going and coming back from work. They see us taking the kids off to school and back. They are the people that see how we live our life. And for our neighbours, our lives are a witness and we're watched whether we know it or not. So are we actually loving our neighbours? Well, hands up, I'm not. I don't find it very easy at all, and I'm not very sociable until I know someone, and I like to get to know someone slowly. Totally selfish and on my terms, I know, and it's an area I'm going to take a really good look at. Now, Kevin and I would say we work well together as a team with our different personalities, because he would make the initial contacts with people, new people, and then when he's broken the ice and started the relationship, I would feel better or easier at getting to know them on a deeper level. One of his biggest frustrations during this isolation period has been the fact that he just can't go out and speak with people. But of course on Monday that all changed. And also the other issue is it doesn't help that we've got a dog that barks at birds. And as there are 10 pigeons at any one given time in our garden at the moment, it's very difficult to stop him. And we spend most of our time calling him in. But because of this, our neighbour phoned the church office and complained. So now I feel even worse about getting to know my neighbours, because they'll probably say, oh yeah, we know you. You're the one with the noisy dog and the loud voice. For some of you, you will have lived in the area for a long time and probably know people well and have even helped people out during this time of isolation. For others, you might just be beginning to get to know them, and this time of isolation has been an opportunity for you to get to know people better. I know a couple of you have been making cakes and giving them to the neighbours, which is a brilliant idea because it breaks down barriers and says, I care. As we emerge from isolation and are allowed to meet with up to 6 people, now is the time we can consider inviting people over for a cup of tea maybe, sitting in the garden in this beautiful weather. Or if we're brave enough, we could even invite them over for a barbecue. Just looking for times where we can catch people's eye and say maybe, it's great to be able to see people now, isn't it? Or, how have you coped over that period of time? Either way, we need to find opportunities to make contact with our neighbours just as Jesus tells us to. So we need to be more intentional to get to know our neighbours. Let me just read you a paragraph from this book on the art of neighbouring. So it says, recently, I was in my living room working on my laptop when I happened to glance out the window and see my neighbour Eric. He was working on a car I didn't recognise. I don't know much about cars, and actually I know next to nothing about cars. However, I was curious and I knew this was an opportunity to both procrastinate and to interact with my neighbour. So I simply walked outside and asked Eric what he was up to and if there was anything I could do to help. All I did that afternoon was close up my laptop and walk outside. Yet that ended up leading me into a great conversation. Eric and I talked for over 20 minutes and he told me that the car was actually his son's and not his. His son had recently bought the car and it was already having some issues. And pretty soon, the conversation had moved to something more significant than cars. Eric shared that his son had a lot going on and he was worried about him and some of his recent decisions. A simple conversation about a broken car ended up becoming a conversation of depth. We both left knowing each other a little better, and it all started when I glanced out of my window and made a decision to walk outside and say hello. Have you ever stared into your garage and thought, I know that I need to spend a day cleaning this place, but I just don't know where to begin? Neighbouring can be a bit like that for many of us. Knowing where to start is sometimes the hardest step. In moving from theory to practice, we can sometimes become immobilised while trying to figure out what to do. Last week we spent every day at Kevin's mum's house stripping wallpaper and talking to the tree surgeon and the electrician, and then my son-in-law came and rendered the areas that needed filling with the wall down and a door being bricked up. So it's a constant thing. But one of the things I noticed was how easy it was to talk to the people who lived in her house. Partly because Kevin's mum has lived there for 65 years and people knew her, but also because she lived in a semi-detached house, so it's easy to bump into people when you're leaving the house or just getting into your car outside. How our house is set up does make a huge difference. If we live in a house which leads on the street, is easier than if we live in a block of apartments. My son and his girlfriend live in an apartment and don't know their neighbours at all except through their local Facebook page. They just go to work and then come home. But recently they've been working from home. And at the weekend, one of the neighbours came across to Lawrence as he was approaching his car and told him, "Two guys have been trying to get in your car on Friday night. And I caught them on CCTV. And he also went on to say it might be worth Lawrence getting a steering lock. Lawrence was really thankful that this person bothered to tell him and has since bought a steering lock. And if that person hadn't have bothered, he may well have had his car stolen. We cannot love our neighbours if we don't know who they are. So we need to be intentional about getting to know them. Otherwise, we'll only feel comfortable with the people we know well, and we won't make a difference in our community. The first step to loving our neighbour is to move from stranger to acquaintance. Learning a person's name is the first and easiest step you can take to become a better neighbour. Let me just read something further from this book. So the message for us: just make some effort. And remember, relationships don't happen when we heap pressure onto ourselves and others. So don't try too hard. This can happen more easily than you anticipate because of this is how God designed you to live. You were built to connect with other people. So be who you are and relationships will grow out of that. It makes friendship normal and natural, something that just happens rather than something that's forced. And the most natural way to connect with people is through shared activities. If you remember, I mentioned that earlier on. Here are several examples of ways you can connect with those who live closest to you. So, baking and cooking. We know lots of people who like to cook different types of tasty treats. And often those who love baking want an excuse to make a few pies or some brownies. Sharing some with the neighbours is a great way to connect with them. It is hard work, but if you're really inclined to do this, you'll enjoy the process. And that's certainly what happened to a couple of people in our church. You've already done that. There's playing sports. There's all kinds of ways that your neighbours are probably interacting in sports right now. Some might be playing in the league, some have kids who play, or maybe some haven't been involved in sports lately because they've been too busy. They just need someone to give them an excuse to dust off those old golf clubs or put on your running shoes. All you need to do is ask them to come along with you. Or what about watching sports or other shows on TV? There are probably neighbours around you who are watching the exact same sports event or TV show or movie as you. These people are 100 feet from your front door, watching the same thing as you and maybe on a better TV. It doesn't take much effort to invite them over or head over to their place. Just choose to do something with others that you were going to do alone. We know it's easy to assume that our neighbours don't want to participate in any of these activities with us, but we're constantly surprised as the positive responses we get to invitations. We simply invite people to join our regular activities, or conversely, now they invite us into some of their regular activities. It's also easy to assume that people are too busy to want to join in with some of your activities, but plenty of people are hungry for interaction, particularly when it's part of an overall picture of a growing friendship. The world around us is lonelier than we know, so it's good to have your radar up, purposefully looking for ways you can engage with people who live close to you. One of the easiest ways to do it is eat together. So it's easy to say, you're eating, we're eating, let's eat together. Yes, that does require some intentionality, but it's not hard to invite others to join you because you're already going to eat anyway, right? Just try it. You'll be surprised how easy it is. And what's more, doing the small things and sharing what you love can often overlap. Sorry, I lost my place there. Overlap with actual needs of neighbours. You have skills that enable you to serve others, just as our friend Rob learned. Here is his story. I would say that I am friends with most of my neighbours. With almost everyone, I'm comfortable enough with our friendship to knock on their garage door instead of the front door. They do the same when they come over to my house. I make my living as a contractor, and this has enabled me to serve my neighbours in a very tangible way. On our block, there are a couple of single mums and an elderly couple. A few years ago, I mentioned to them that I was willing to help out if they needed any home repairs. This has opened up a lot of opportunities for me to connect with others that God has placed around me. And often I will invite one of my other neighbours to come with me when I'm tackling a small project in the neighbourhood. Not only am I able to use my skills to serve, but I also get to know another neighbour better. It has simply been a matter of making myself available and inviting others to join in. So here's the challenge. This week, let's all be intentional with our neighbours. We all have gifts. We all have things that we do well. So why don't we just have a pray about that and ask God how we can get in touch with our neighbours. Obviously, we can meet up with 6 people, and we can meet people as long as we stay 2 meters apart and we're outside. But let's each of us learn the name of one neighbour this week, and I'll let you know how I get on next week. Okay? So enjoy the beautiful sunshine and all that God has created. Bye.